Never.
Uh-huh.
So I found this, which is I don't even know what it's made of anymore. I've been carrying it around since the 1980s,
Okay.
from country to country. And this, which is a faux fur kind of dealy. And
Mhm.
I was thinking about using this for the contrast and this for the base
Okay.
because it's kind of costuming, and that's sort of what I do is a lot of, historical costuming kind of stuff. And we have events and teas and all this stuff. And I have enough to make a matching skirt out of the green, which
Mhm.
I know is obnoxious as all get out, but I have one that's worse. Um, it's bright, bright blue. Um, do you think it would work, or do you think I should stick? I do have some wool that I have a herringbone wool, very, just gray herringbone, sort
Mhm.
of classically elegant. I could use that instead. Um, I'm just wondering about the techniques that we're going to be learning. Would I be better off with the wool?
I think you could probably make this work. I would say, again, see, this is where I've had people say to me, "You used to really hate fusing." Like, well, yeah, I used to. But, for some
Pardon?
things, block fusing is going to be useful. And
So I have a question on that term. I don't know that term,
oh,
block.
block fusing, what you're doing is you're taking the yardage before you cut anything out and fusing the fusible to the back of the yardage.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. I just didn't know the term.
And
And
you
what I
may or may not have someone who does it in Los Angeles. I know in New York, we have places that, one of the things I found is I go and I buy the fusible I want, then I take the fusible and the fabric to the place, and it's a big machine they run it through to just do it all at one time. So it's a good it's a lot easier than doing it yourself if there's a place there that
I
does
can
a lot of
check.
yeah.
So what kind of a fusible would I want that whisper
Like
weight?
if you could use a fusible weft.
Fusible weft.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's also at Gorgeous Fabrics.
I'm sure she has something yeah. And the thing to do is call her and say, I have this fabric. Um, what fusible do you recommend? And she should have something that will work.
Oh, she's got a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if she has a fusible weft or a fusible tricot, that would work quite well.
I might have some fusible tricot.
Yeah.
And I would just go with a lightweight one,
Yes.
right?
Mhm. Yeah. Because then, because Southern California, you don't want something that's, be like wearing a carpet felt or a blanket. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I go to New York once in a while, but um, not too much because my kid would hate that. So
Oh, well, you could just sneak in and not tell him.
I could do that, but it would be hard
Yeah, I understand.
not to like just stalk him outside of his dorm or
Yeah.
whatever.
Okay,
Thank you.
so questions, other questions? Yes, go ahead,
Good
Sally.
question. When I was making the adjustment for the back
Hmm.
on your example, you took the end point of the sleeve and drew the straight line that was 5 inches down from the neck.
Right.
On my pattern, the 5 inches down from the neck didn't end in the end point of
Well,
that corner. But was that okay? I kept
yeah,
it
yeah,
parallel.
yeah. And so you could kind of take it, you could angle it a little bit. So the meat of the matter here is you want the hinge points to be hingy, but
Right.
the lines that get there don't have to. You just
Okay.
have to, does that? I'm not making
Yeah,
sense.
it made sense, made
Yeah,
perfect sense.
yeah.
And my other question was, with because I'm short and
Uh-huh.
I'm short-waisted,
Mhm.
the 28-inch length is too long for
Okay.
me.
Yeah, you can make it
And,
short.
and so I shortened it,
Mhm.
but I just kind of had to guess at the proportions of the collar
Mhm.
because where that should fit. I kept it still the distance between the 2 points, 4.5 inches,
Yeah.
and kept the 5 and then the 6.
Yeah. And so then that'll come up a little bit. And so, one of the things that I like to do, and this is something I learned from my teacher, Simone, is if you go to, you can go to the art supply store and get like 1/4 inch wide tape.
Yeah.
It's usually black. What she would have us do when we were doing the models on, she would have us tape the dress form, all the design lines on the dress form, and then you could have the basic body, and you could tape the lines before you even start drafting the collar to see
Yeah.
how it looks. And the thing with my students at FIT, they tend to look at the garment, they don't look at the entire figure. So you stand 10 feet away from the mirror and you look at it, and that's going to double your viewing distance. And then you can really look and say, well, I really would like that intersection point down a half inch or up a
Yeah.
half inch, or this a little wider or this a little narrower, based on your particular figure. That is all entirely kosher. Okay. So other questions?
Yes, Kenneth, you are unheaded for me. I only see you to here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And so that is a little bit difficult to hear.
Oh, okay. So are you
Just happened. It was not in the beginning.
okay? I don't know what to say. Is
Steve,
everyone
go
else,
ahead.
everyone else can see me?
I see you just fine.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I don't know what to say to that. So,
Okay, then it's okay.
but do you have a question? Are you doing okay?
Nee, I'm doing okay.
Okay. So I don't know if anyone follows me on Instagram.
Yes.
Okay. Well, for those who don't, because I've got to show these, because I'm done with all of the making of the little tiny clothes and the lessons. And so now I'm doing the story photos. And so
Oh, how cute.
yeah.
Look.
Yeah, I saw that one. That's great.
Yes.
What this is, some people catch the reference. There's a famous photo of Diana Vreeland in her office. And of course, I couldn't do the cigarette smoke because I don't want to model smoking behavior. But this is actually, there's no desk in there, but it is photographed in my office. So, and I had to, of course, put different photos in. So I've been working on that. And let's see what else. There's the other one here. Because this morning I just finished the magazine cover with Medusa.
Oh, fabulous.
And the fun part about this is this is aside from the type, it's two different photos. It's her with the car, and then there's La Scala. And
yeah, isn't it amazing what we can do now?
I just marvel at what, and of course, the challenge with this is, like with the Medusa and the car, is like I had to make sure the drop shadows matched. Because there's a shadow, if she were parked in front of La Scala, there would have been a shadow. And so I had to make that happen and make it look realistic. So now I'm kind of off and running on the story. So if you see things, that I post like that, because I'm just, I'm teasing these things, these are for the book. And so, yeah, so I haven't completely figured out the whole story yet, but I have until the end of May to do that. So, I'm trying to figure out the rest of the story. And then actually tonight I have to check in with my husband because he's doing all the sketches. So now he has all the photos, he has all the swatches. So now I'm going to have to say to him, okay, honey, start drawing. So yeah. So, okay. So other questions before we begin? Shelley, do you have any questions? Okay, just hanging out there. Okay. So what
I had some technical issues I fixed.
Oh, good. Okay. Because as much as I love, certain parts of technology, there are other parts of it that I really, like if something goes wrong, see with mechanical things, I'm pretty good. I can kind of look at something and figure out what's wrong with it and, maybe, most of the time make it work again. But with computers, you can't open the back of the computer and see, oh, this little thing is sticking over here. So,
same. I just push buttons until I hope it gets fixed.
Yes. So yes, that's, it's, you know, at FIT, my students kind of look at me like, and I kind of do the whole, I'm an old man now, you know, grumpy old man, or old man or grumpy old man. It depends on kind of what the conversation is about. But so yes, I'm embracing my inner grumpy old man. So
Perfect. Me too. Well, not the man part, but I blame that on my husband.
okay. Okay, so today we're going to start initial construction. So as always, you know, I'm going to collapse down the screen. So if you have a question, shout it out. I can stop the video at any time. And also, yeah, if you turn off your video cameras for this, it'll give me more bandwidth to work with because I'm in New York and it's kind of slow. So let us begin.
Without a video camera?
Well, actually, you can keep yours on, but what I found is for most people, if you turn it off, it's going to give me a little more bandwidth because sometimes it gets a little hinky. So, but you can keep the audio on because you're going to get to see me. It's just that I won't be able to see you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So let us begin.
So here we have the front facing and the front body cut out. So now I'm going to talk about the marking because there's some marking that you need to do. On the shoulder where the collar intersects the shoulder seam on the body and on the facing, you want to draw the stitching line, which is 5/8 of an inch in. You're going to need both of those because we will need to stay stitch those. So then moving down, what you can see here on the body, I marked the roll line. We need to stay that. Also from about here down, I marked the stitching lines and then the fold for the hem all the way across. So then on the facing, you can see here, I have marked, again, the stitching lines up to midway up. So then also you want to mark this point X here and here. Again, that is 3.5 inches from this corner here, same here. So these are the markings that you need to prepare for construction. The next thing I will do is I will go over to the pressing table and fuse some fusible stay tape, and I will bring that back to show you. Here we are, back from the pressing table. So as you can see, from the upper end of the roll line all the way down to the hem here on both sides, I have fused the fusible stay tape on the roll line. Next, we want to stay the corners at the necks. This is the intersection of the collar and the shoulder seam. Now, I'll just zoom in a little bit. What you want to do is about 1/2 inch from the corner. You want to start here to sew down and sew across. So we want to sew this on the body as well as the facing. I will take you over to the machine and we will stay stitch these on the facing. So here we are at the machine, and you can see here, I'm starting the stitch about 1/2 inch from the corner. The stitch length is 0.5 to 0.75. You want an extremely short stitch. After trimming the thread, this is what it will look like. I will go off camera and sew these intersections on the body, and then we will go to the next step. As you can see here, I've sewn both of these intersections on the body. So the body fronts and the facings are prepared for construction. To begin constructing the facing, you want to mark the stitching lines. Just zoom in here. You want that intersection and that intersection marked on your facing, because these intersections here correspond to these intersections here. So now that we have all of our marking for the facings done, and again, these two angles here are stay stitched, we can begin construction. You begin by pinning the center back seam on the collar. Once this is pinned, I will go over to the machine and sew at 5/8 with a straight stitch, and I will press the seam open and bring it back here. There's no mystery there, so I will see you shortly. Now that we have that seam sewn and pressed open, I like to do what I call preliminary bulk reduction. So what I will do here is I want to narrow the seam allowance to, about 1/8 of an inch below where it will intersect the collar edge. This is just going to reduce bulk so that you don't have big mass of bulk there. Then I also do the same thing here. That way, you only have just a small amount of seam allowance that gets caught in the seam. So then our next step is going to be, zoom in here, there we go. We clip right to the stitching. Don't get scared. Don't leave a millimeter there. You clip right to the stitching, because if you don't clip to the stitching, what's going to happen is when you sew these corners, you're going to get a pucker. Okay, so this is what's called inside-outside corner. So before we actually sew these, I'm going to drop in a video that I have prepared for my class at FIT on how to sew this, so you'll get a good idea of how this works. Knowing how to sew a really crisp inside corner is going to serve you well in any situation where you're sewing an oblique angle with an obtuse angle. This is a 90 degree, but the steps that we're using will work really on anything. Like, for example, if you're sewing the underarm gusset on a garment, or if you're sewing a collar to a shawl lapel jacket, you're going to run into what I call inside corners. Now, these both have different looks. You can see here, the surface is completely flat. So in this instance, we've pressed everything open so that it reads flat. On this one, just to compare, this one you can see just by how the light plays off of it, that you have all of the seam allowances pressed in one direction. So it creates what looks like an inset. The only difference in these is in the pressing. The construction is pretty much the same. So we have plenty to do, so let's get busy. To begin, as you can see here, I have marked the stitching lines on both pieces. Now, it's an optical illusion, but this line equals this line, and this line equals this line. These are 1-inch seam allowances. I find that for this, it's easier to have a wider seam allowance and then trim it down if you need to later. The first step is going to be cutting about 1 inch square of a fusible Pellon. Then we will fuse that right at this intersection here to stabilize that corner. So I will go off camera and fuse that, bring it back here and show you my results.
Kenneth,
We are.
Yes.
We have.
if I've got a quick question.
Go ahead.
I'm using a wool that's a light, a loose-ish weave. So I've already done the block fusing.
Yes.
Would I also need to add another piece of fusing?
It doesn't hurt, but it's not necessary. I didn't do it on mine, on this one.
Okay.
So, the thing is short stitches in that corner, and that should secure it so that it won't pull loose.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Reinforced. And so now I just want to trace out those lines here so I know where my corner is. Because this is going to be our stitching guide for the next step. Next, we go to the machine. Here we are at the machine, and we're going to be sewing about 3/8 of an inch from the corner down, and then we're going to turn and sew that way. So first I will put the needle in, and as you can see, I'm using an orange thread so you can see what we're sewing. Just zoom in a little bit here so you can get a better look. Here, 0.5 to 0.75 stitch length, short stitch. And then we turn one stitch. Back up a little bit here. Take the work out and show you. You can see that one little stitch walking across is going to give us space to cut. It'll give us room for the scissors, and it's going to help us to turn this corner when we sew it to the other piece. I will trim the threads, and I will meet you back at the work table. Here we are. Now, this is where we clip this corner. Now, the short stitches enable you to clip right up to the stitches, but you sneak up on it. You don't have to get there all in one go. This is where having a good scissors is going to help you. Notice I've cut right to that row of stitching. That's important for the next step. So now that we've cut this, we're going to start pinning it to the other piece here. I've turned the pieces this way because we're going to start here and sew down to this corner in the first step, and then eventually we're going to start here and sew the rest of the way. So I find it's a little easier to sort of get my bearings, because first thing we want to do is match this point with this point. And since everything is going to be matched up right sides together, the easiest way for me to see it is to turn this over like so. And I'm going to put the pin in right there. And you want the pin to emerge on that corner, or dead on that corner. Okay, so we have those 2 points matched, and you can pin like so. So as you can see, we're pinned dead on that corner. Now we're going to match backwards and pin based. Just make sure that your pins, you pin it so that both stitching lines are one on top of the other. Now, you could, if you want to, after you've pinned it, you could thread base this. That is entirely kosher. If I were thread basting, I would use the thread that's in the machine so that you don't have to worry about not getting all of your thread basting out. So what's going to happen when we take this over to the machine? We're going to start here and we're going to sew down to here. That's our first pass on sewing this corner. I'll meet you at the machine. I'm here at the machine and I have changed thread color to blue so you can see the new stitching that we're sewing. And we're going to put the needle down right on the stitching line. And we'll start with the standard 2.5 stitch length until about 3/8 of an inch from the corner, and then we'll shorten the stitch. So again, that's pin basted, and we're going to sew on the stitching line. You can see here, we have the short stitches that we sewed to stay stitch. Now I'm going to shorten the stitch to 0.5 to 0.75. We're going to sew until we get to the corner. If I could zoom in a little bit more. Okay, we're at the corner. Now, this is crucial, so pay attention here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to raise the presser foot. I'm going to turn it about 45 degrees. Then I'm going to open this up and lower the foot. We're going to sew off the fabric onto the seam allowance of the underlayer. So now, let me just take this out of the machine. I will show you what it looks like. You can see here, sewn down to the corner, off the edge, and I'll turn it over on this way so you can see also from the back. That is what that stitch looks like. So now making that turn is going to make it so that when we sew the other side, we're going to have a razor sharp corner. So we've sewn, I'm going to take this over to the work table and we're going to continue. Our next step really is turning everything this way. And so it's all hinging on that little V-shaped stitching. And so we're going to pin this here on the marked line on the other side. And we will pin baste all of these to make sure that they sit exactly one on top of the other. So again, like I said, if you really wanted to hand baste it, no harm, no foul. So this is how it's going to go. We're going to start the stitching right here and sew that way, but we'll go to the machine for that. So our next step, the machine. We're back at the machine and I have changed the thread so that the bright pink is going to be for the final step. Now, this particular foot is the generic adjustable zipper foot. What I love about this foot is that you can adjust it, pardon my manicure, you can adjust it so that the needle sits right at the edge of the foot or even slightly outside the foot. And having it even slightly outside the foot is going to serve in this particular case, because when we come in here, what we're going to be doing here is we want the needle to go in right there, right at that corner. See if I can get some light in there. Take that out. There we go. You can see it a little better. So the needle goes in right there. And the beauty of this is that the foot sits over here. You have all of the mass here. You don't have to worry about the foot disturbing any of this. That's what I love about this foot. Now we're going to start stitching at 0.5, 0.75. You start stitching at the short stitches, and we're going to sew away from this corner. You notice that the stitching that we're sewing is ever so slightly to the left of the stay stitching. That's as it should be. And then when we've gotten about 3/8 of an inch in, then we can just sew. Now, do a close up here. You can see the needle started. And if it starts a little bit off of the fabric, that's okay, as long as you catch that corner. So now let's do a little reveal. That, even before pressing, you have a good sharp corner. That's the mark of good sewing. Next, we're going to trim and press. So I will meet you at the pressing table. Now there are two different ways of pressing. But before we actually press the seam allowances to their final destination, we want to press everything as sewn. And so you can press the seam allowances all to one side, which I'm going to choose to do in this particular sample. So press it on a seam roll. And there you have it. So what this does is it puts all the bulk to this side. So you have a little bit of a roll. You have a little bit of a dimensional quality to it. Now, the other option is you can trim out this corner here and press everything open. It's a subtle difference. But this one presents a flatter surface. This one makes the fabric look a little bit inset. Now, after you have pressed this, you can come back and trim out this seam allowance to about half of its beginning width. That way, in the final garment, when you press it, you're not going to have this big bulk here. It's going to lie smoothly. So, inside corners.
So I'm going to stop here for a moment and see if there are any questions.
No questions. I just have to pick my brain up off the floor. That was amazing.
You know, that little corner thing, it's amazing. Just like the little things that make all the difference, like turning that after the first pass to create that angle is what really makes for a sharp corner. And that was just something I discovered one day, just, thinking about it. And I said, let me give that a try. And I did. And it works. So there you have it. So
it's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, I do a lot of quilting and you have a lot of inset stuff and I'm not bad, but this changes everything.
Well, it's because see, my whole thing, and this is whenever I'm teaching something, I want it to be repeatable and reliable. And I know that this works every time. And so I use it. So, yeah. So other questions before we continue?
Yes, a little one. Do you stitch with your Mara 30 or? It looks so
Oh
thick.
no. Well, it's because I've zoomed in so much. This is just the regular machine sewing thread. I use a
Okay.
Guillemot, just a regular.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, it does look like I'm sewing with rope because I zoomed in so much.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
so other questions?
Yes, thanks.
We're good. Okay, well
Yes.
we will continue.
And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that little tutorial. So now this corner here matches this corner. This corner matches this corner. We're going to be sewing in 3 different stages. So I'll pin and sew 1, pin and sew the next, pin and sew the third. That's where we're going with this. So I'm going to change camera angles and show you pinning the first pass. To pin the first pass, we want to match this intersection with this intersection and pin these 2 together. So how this works, we turn, I'll turn this up, right side up. There we go. So I like to get everything situated. Then I want to pin here and find, there we are, find that intersection. So we pin those 2 together on the stitching line.
Kenneth, I have a question.
Then
Yes, go ahead.
On the example the video with the green felt,
Uh-huh.
you mentioned that you like an inch seam allowance.
Yeah, I prefer an inch, but 5/8 is plenty wide for this.
Okay, so if we wanted to, we could add an inch as our seam allowance here, but it's not necessary.
Not necessary, no. No, because see the green sample, that's for my students at FIT. And so as you know, when you're teaching them, it's easier for them to manage a 1-inch seam allowance.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
we pin like so. So we're going to sew from here down and then stitch off the edge. Now, you probably will notice as we're working that I'm using a contrasting thread or different color threads so you can actually see what I'm doing. This jacket is a sample. I don't anticipate anyone wearing it. So if we have thread that doesn't match, all good. So I will meet you at the sewing machine. Now, you can see here that I have put on my generic adjustable zipper foot, and I'm going to zoom in just a little more so you can get a good look. You notice that the needle is right at the edge and the foot is to the right of the needle. Having this foot makes sewing these corners so much easier. So now what we're going to do here, just there, better. Okay. We're going to start with the standard 2.5 stitch, and we're going to sew from the facing edge You can see here we're headed up towards the corner. So now I'm going to shorten the stitch to 0.5 to 0.75. You want an extremely short stitch because what we're going to do, just to give you a heads up, we're going to sew ever so slightly to the left of the stay stitching and stop exactly right there and then pivot. So you see where we're going and then you'll see it and then I'll show you the results. So and so what I'm going to do here is just check one more. And then we turn about 90 degrees. And sew off edge. So let me just put the threads and I will show you the results here. There we go. See how that corner turns and what it looks like from the other side. There we go. If you get a little wobble right there, don't sweat that. That'll just flatten out in pressing. We finished step 1. Now we go back to the work table to pin step 2. So we're back at the work table. Before I pin the second, I'd like to just clip the seam allowances about 1/4 to 3/8 in. I like to make a little V there so I know where the center is. Having these clipped on this curve is going to make our life a little easier getting around this curve. So I've clipped. So now the trick here is to, actually, when I get flat, it's going to be a little easier. You want to open this up. And I'll do that move again in close up so you can see it. So we're starting here. You can even put your thumb there or point of your scissors. See, what you want to do is you want that line there to pin onto the marked line on the facing. So now let me turn this over, and so it's going to look like so. Now I just want to make sure this is where you check over a little. You can hand baste this if you want. There's no shame in that. I've gotten to where I can do it with pins, but hand basting. There we go. Hand basting is always a good idea. You'll get no pushback from me on that. So there's that pin. Then we want to match the center back with the center back clip on the facing. And then I'm going to pin, and you can just sort of massage these together because you're going to press it later. Now you notice I pin parallel to the seam. Some people pin perpendicular, potato, patata. So now we're over here. So what we want to do is match this corner with that corner. Sorry. As you've probably guessed by now, I am my own camera person. So we take this pin here, we turn everything over, and there we go. That pin's there. And so the object then is to pin the 2 stitching lines together like we did for the last one. Let's just make sure they're, yes, okay. And from here, we pin back towards the center back. So let me just zoom out here, show you what we have accomplished. So our next step is going to be going over to the machine and starting the stitching here, taking it over to here. So I will meet you at the sewing machine. So here we are at the machine. The foot is still in the same position. Now, just to explain, we're going to put the needle in. Let's back that pin out. We're going to put the needle in right there, right where we turn the corner to stitch off the edge in the last step. The stitch length here again is 0.5 to 0.75. And so let me just get that needle in there. And now this is one of those times you really want to hold the thread ends because you don't want to create a snarl underneath the fabric by having it get tangled. So end of the previous stay stitching, then you want to just sew at 5/8 of an inch with a standard 2.5 stitch, which I'm going to do. No mystery here. So let me just zoom out so you can see how that works. So we're heading up towards the corner, the second corner. As you can see here, this is coming. So what you want to do is get to that stay stitching, shorten your stitch back down to 0.5 to 0.75. Now let me adjust here so you can see. And so again, short stitches right to that corner. Then turn the work sew off the edge. You can see there's the corner and we overshot a little bit. What I will do is I will take that out and correct that because we don't want it to be incorrect. So I will bring it back when it's correct. So now I have corrected the corner. We will go back to the work table to sew the third pass.
And isn't it nice to know that I make mistakes too?
So what we want to do now is to sew the third pass. So what we want to do here is we want this turned like so. I like to pin this one and work backwards a little. So the object here is you want that stitching line to match that stitching line. So now again, like I said earlier, you could thread baste, and thread basting would have kept me from having to take that out. So just move this a little over. So there we are. And again, back to the sewing machine. So, like I said before, we're going to put the needle in right there. The stitch length is 0.5 to 0.75. We're going to sew down to about there, lengthen the stitch to 2.5, and finish the rest of that seam. So what that will look like here is there's that. And as before, you want to hold the thread tails so that you don't get any kind of snarl underneath the fabric. Then you lengthen your stitch to the standard 2.5. sew the final seam. That's what it looks like here. That's what it looks like there. So aren't you glad you marked everything? So now we trim the threads. From here, we go to the pressing table. Before we press the seams open, press as sewn. And you can stretch this seam allowance a little bit. It's going to make it easier to press. So now that we have everything pressed as sewn, before we open the seam allowances, we want to clip these corners on the facing. So let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see that corner and that corner are trimmed. From here, I like to press shoulder seams first and then the neck. So what that will look like. There we go. Press, and you can start pressing this corner by turning that seam allowance back. So that's one end. Now let me press the other end. So first, shoulder seam, and then press the corner open. And then finally, you will press open the neck seam. Now, I tend to leave these seam allowances untrimmed. They'll come in handy later. So we have all of our pressing done. Let us go back to the work table to survey the results. So here we have the facing completely constructed. This is the back neck facing. This is the collar edge all along, center back seam. So now let's just zoom in because I'd like you to see the corners from the back and the front. So here, there's the corner from the back. And turning it over, there's the corner from the front. See if I can get the lighting better. So yeah, you can see right there. You have a nice crisp corner. There's no buckles. There's no puckers. Now the facing is finished. Something to remember when we're sewing this part of the collar on the body, when we sew the back to the front, it works exactly the same way. So I'm not going to do a long drawn out demonstration on that because it works exactly the same way. Now this is the lining. There's not a lot of mystery to this. It has a shoulder seam. It has a side seam on either side, and there's a center back seam. I'm going to show you the details, but really Sewing the shoulder seams, sewing the side seams, not that terribly difficult. So let's look at the details. The center back seam, as you can see, sews up to about 10 inches below the neck. And then you make a clip right here. So above, this turns into the pleat that we drafted in the pattern. So it presses one way when you install the lining to the body. But below, you press the seam allowance open. Now, also, if you notice, I like to pink the edges of the lining and the cuffs, and I like to press them over by 1/4 of an inch or 3/8. This is going to make it so that later it's going to be easy to install. You don't have to go back later and press that up. So this is the center back seam. So next we're going to look at the cuffs. The cuff, as you can see, also I like to pink the edge so it doesn't unravel. I also like to turn this up by 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch. Again, makes it so much easier to do it now than when you decide you want to try to install the lining into the garment. Now, let's look at some clipping. Since this is a dolman, you're going to have the curve under the arm. Now, some people have learned to clip both seam allowances at the same place. The problem with this is that if you clip both seam allowances at the same place, it does two things. It creates a hinge so your corner doesn't press or your curve doesn't press nicely. It also weakens the seam. So as you can see here, we stagger the clips. And by staggering the clips, you don't weaken the seam and your curve presses smoothly as opposed to getting weird little corners. So now that we have the lining sewn, we can set it aside and continue.
Okay. Are your brains full yet?
So how do you always make it look so easy, Kenneth?
Because I do this a lot. This is something that my students at FIT, it's always funny because when I show, I remember the first time years ago when I showed like single welt pocket, double welt pocket, they were all like, because they thought it would take as long as it took for me.
Oh.
And then, then they're like, how, I said, okay, kids, I'm old. I have made hundreds of these. And so if I can't make it look easy, shame on me. So yeah, it's all practice. That's all this is. There's no magic here. It's just you do it again and you do it again and you do it again. And eventually, it looks easy. So if because there's some people who are like, because I have friends who sew and they won't show me what they sew. Mm-hmm. And I just like, why is that? And they look at me and say, really? It's sort of like, see, I have my friend Jackie's a chef. I would never cook a meal for her. I would never even scramble eggs for her because she knows the best way to do it and I don't. So yeah, it's all practice. Okay, so I think I think that's enough for today. You're all kind of looking a little bit bleary, but so questions? Any questions, comments, hopes, fears, dreams, desires?
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ruth. And then Nina. Yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of a throwback question to the idea of using fusible weft with different fabrics.
Yes.
I'm also kind of struggling with the kind of fabric to use. I have something, I don't think it's a tweed. It's more like a boucle.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. Yeah. But again, I can't get the fusing done here. There's nowhere to take it where I live.
Yeah.
So is that something I could probably do myself to give it a little bit?
The thing is, you want to have a good iron.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and so if because there have been times I didn't want to like make the schlep uptown to do it, or I was like in the middle of the night, I needed to get it done. So the thing is kind of rough cut your garment section, if you have enough fabric to do this, rough cut. You don't have to like spread the whole yardage out on a pressing table. It should kind of rough cut your fronts, rough cut your backs, and fuse the sections themselves as opposed to trying to fuse the entire piece before you actually start cutting.
So if it's a fairly textured boucle, kind of looks like tweed, but it's textured.
Yeah.
That's going to adhere to it all right.
Oh, yes. And see the beauty of having, if you're working with like a boucle or something, because some people think that doing like block fusing on boucles, one thing is lint tweeds. I love lint tweeds. You cut into them, they just disappear. And so what I found is that for tweeds that are, any kind of loosely woven fabric, it's the way to go because it keeps the fabric from unraveling before you sew the thing together. Also, since it is a tweed, since it's a boucle, since it has a high texture, there is enough texture for the adhesive to grip. And then if it doesn't, because there are some times that it may peel off a little bit here and there, no harm, no foul, you're never going to notice it. So did that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, I have an ordinary iron. It's not anything special.
Yeah. Well, what I would do is turn the heat up. Because see, one thing a lot of people aren't aware of with household irons is that the temperature is not as hot as it should be, because they do that for lawsuits. This is something years ago I learned when I was working. God, I mean, we're talking like 100 years ago. Back in window display. See, my particular thing when I worked at Macy's, I was the fabric guy. Anything that needed made, we had an industrial machine that was my territory. Any kind of we would get this fabric that it was flocked fabric that was supposed to look like velvet. I could get it to do what I needed it to do. And the thing I learned early on was that you turn the damn thing all the way up to linen.
Okay.
So seriously, because it is not as hot as it should be.
Okay.
And so then, it also, and it couldn't hurt to just maybe have a press, as much as I like silk organza as a pressing cloth, you probably could do this, like, lay the silk organza on it, spritz it with water, and then steam the hell out of it.
Okay.
And the thing to know is, like, when you're pressing, let it, because if it has a little light on it that says it's hot enough, when the light turns off or the light turns, I don't know, some different irons do it differently. If the light kind of turns on and it, is starting to sputter a little bit, what that's telling you is that the iron needs to heat up. So this is one of those things you'll have to go a little bit slow, but you can make it happen.
Okay.
Iron.
I did mine at home because Spokane does not offer, those kind of services. Yeah. It took me a while. Took me and I'd do a little bit and I'd come back and do a little bit more because I didn't want to stand there for the whole time. But I did it on mine and it fused. Yeah. And it's a lightly woven wool, so it needed the stability.
Yeah. So see, I'm lucky. I have the deluxe iron because, well, I do this for a living. I really should. And if you ever want the deluxe iron, the reliable steam generator irons are really the way to go, because and we had them at FIT until like a semester, like in the fall we came back and it was like these irons that were like, you have to stand there and blast the condensation out. This is the thing I hate with a lot of the steam generator irons, but with the reliable, like the 300i or the 600i, which is what I have, they have solved that problem. You can just hit the switch and you have the steam and you don't have to worry about it spitting all over your pressing table.
Yeah, that would be nice.
It's one of those things. This is where, see, I believe in telling people what I want for birthday, holiday, whatever. And, so I just, especially like my husband, and he's really good at this. And it's always good when they listen. You just say, okay, folks, have a picture of it. This is what I want. And I think it's drycleaningsupply.com is the best price.
Oh, okay.
And also the thing to know with them, because I finally, I wore mine out because I really use it a lot. And I had to order a new one. So that new one came and I plugged it in and it didn't work. And I was like, what the hell? So I called and I said, I just got this. I plugged it in. It's not heating up and making steam. What do we do here? And the guy said, we will put another one FedEx to you today. So you'll have it tomorrow and we'll send you a ticket so that you can put it on this one and send this one back.
Wow.
It wasn't like you have to send it back and then you get the other one. They're like, we're going to send you another one. You'll have it tomorrow. You send it back when you can. So
They get it.
yeah, on top of, a really good price, their service is excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I live in Canada. It might take a little longer to get here.
Well, actually, Reliable is a Canadian company. You probably
Really?
order it from them. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And
No tariffs.
no tariffs. See? Yeah. And so the other thing to know is the company has excellent customer service. There was one time I had two students and I had a blowout on one of my hoses and I was like, oh my God. And so I have just a regular household iron just in case something happens. But I called the guy and I said, I have a situation here. And the students were at lunch. He said, okay, this is what you do to get you through to the day. You go to the hardware store, you get yourself a 1/2-inch screw clamp, like a radiator screw clamp. You cut 2 inches off, you put the hose back on, you put the screw clamp on, you're going to be fine.
Oh,
He
that
could have
works.
said, oh, there's nothing I can do. You're going to have to order the part. Well, I had to order the part anyway, but I was able to kind of get it. I was able to get through the day and then I ordered the part and they sent the part. So
Oh, brilliant.
excellent Now their household irons, I'm not a big fan of, I will confess, but the steam generator irons are really,
Okay.
so yeah, that's something like holiday, Hanukkah, Christmas, birthday, whatever. Just say
Yeah.
to everyone, hey, you all throw in, this is what I need.
All right. So now I know what to put on my wish list.
Well,
Yeah, I just send my husband links.
yeah, I
I
think
just say birthday, Mother's Day, Christmas.
because you don't want them wasting their money.
No.
Oh yeah, no, we both do it with each
fun.
other now. No, nobody wants the thing that you don't. You think I want that? I don't want that.
Yeah. See, now a dear friend of mine used to say about me, he said, you're the only person I know that gives good gifts. And I'm like, and so I said, well, tell me more about that. And when he said it made sense. He said, you pay attention and you kind of, I know people's taste and I can kind of figure it out, but I don't assume everyone has that and that's okay.
Oh, Andrew, did he like his book
He loved
about
his book.
Edwardian fashion?
He loved his book. He was so thrilled. Yes, because Nina had a book. Tell the story, Nina, because this is kind of fun.
I'm working on a project which is going very slowly, but I had been looking through V&A and the Met about archival pictures of Edwardian fashions. I wanted an Edwardian walking suit. And I came across that V&A and had this exhibit years ago of this one woman who was actually an American woman. She was the granddaughter of Hiram Walker, Johnny Walker, Black, that she married several people, but ended up, fabulously wealthy and had this incredible fashion costume closet. And it was all given to V&A and they did an exhibit of it. And I managed to find online the book, but I had taken pictures of it and sent it to Ken because we had the sit and sew with Susan. And it was like, okay, this is what we're going to work on. And then Ken just fell in love with it, showed it to his husband. And
he knew who she was because he's
Yes.
really steeped in fashion history. And he's like, oh, I saw that book and boy, I wish I'd bought it when it was, and I'm like, okay, then. So Nina helped me to find a Christmas present. He was so thrilled. And this is one of those, I bought it. It was in August, I think we had the sit.
yeah, it was
I bought it. Yeah. And so I bought it, I put it away. And so then, Christmas comes around. I'm like, I bought all the little stocking stuffer things, but it was like, oh shit, what am I going to get him now? And I just happened to look up on my bookshelf and I went, there it is. And that was the big gift. He was thrilled about that. Now he does the same thing. He'll listen. Because I know this sounds crazy, but instant iced tea mix. Hard to find. I know that seems like a very weird. Yeah, yeah, Heather, I saw that face you made. I like it. It's like comfort food from like when I was a kid. My mother used to drink instant iced tea, and we all got used to it.
You
And
talking about like the Nestle stuff that
yeah,
came in the jar?
yeah, uh-huh.
I remember that stuff.
Hard to find, and I finally
Your Oklahoma upbringing is rearing its head. I remember that.
well, that was Kansas. That wasn't Oklahoma. We
Okay.
took that to Oklahoma, and so I needed a teaspoon because I didn't have a long teaspoon for my iced tea glass, and I just happened to mention that I need a teaspoon for this because the regular teaspoons are a little too short. And for my birthday, he bought me a Sterling long teaspoon.
Nice.
So
You
yes,
you have to look up Sarah Milliken. She's a comedian and she does a thing about her boyfriend at the time was a good listener
Mhm.
and would give her presents based on something she said, and he gave her a shoehorn once.
Okay.
She
Would
was
you
like,
okay with that? Or
and she's like, why did, and he says, no, you said you wanted one. I never said that. Yes, you did. And then August 18th, you were in the closet trying to get into the dress, and you said, I need a shoehorn to get into this dress.
oh, he didn't quite understand that the shoehorn wasn't for the shoes. Yes.
Bless his heart. But yeah.
Well, but at least he took notes, you know. So yes. Okay, so questions. Other
Kenneth,
yes, go ahead.
good afternoon, everyone.
Hey there.
This is Paula. I'm in the South. It's hot already here.
Yeah.
What about a linen?
A linen
for
would be
this?
perfect. Perfect.
And would you block fuse it?
It couldn't hurt. It would keep it from wrinkling so much.
Okay. Other than that, would there be a reason to block fuse it?
Not really. No. See, linen and some of the linens and Sandra Betzina, are you familiar with her book Fabric Savvy? She read her section on linen because a lot of the linens these days are treated with a wrinkle resistant finish, and she talks about how you I think it's like you pre-wash it and then you iron it on the hottest temperature you can, and that then will set the wrinkle resistant finish.
Okay.
So then it's going to minimize the wrinkling that you would get from the linen.
So along the way, I've been taught whatever fabric you're working with, pre-shrinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether you send it to the cleaners or however you do that.
Yeah.
Would I pre-shrink the linen and the fusible as well? Because they talk about pre-shrinking the fusible also.
I'm not a big fan of pre-shrinking the fusible.
Okay.
Because see what you can do, is especially if it's a fusible tricot, what you can do is, before you really stick it down to the face fabric, if you just kind of give it a little bit of steam so it can kind of relax, that is really all you need. But, like washing it or whatever, I don't see any benefit to that.
Okay. So if you want to keep the linen kind of light, I'm not going to use the pre-washed one, but I'm not using a real heavy one. Would the lighter weight fusible versus the tricot keep it light?
The Whisper Weight that Anne sells it is an amazing product. I have
some.
It is so good. And it's what I like about it. You could fuse the back. You could, if you're making, say, something in charmeuse, which fabric I just hate, it's enough that it's going to give you a little more body so you can manage it, but it doesn't make it stiff. It still has that fluid quality to it. So I think it would be a good candidate for what you're doing.
Okay. Thank you.
Not that I'm, I don't get any commission from Gorgeous Fabrics. I just want to say that. I
understand.
I see, I'm always, like if there's a good product out there, I want you to know about it because, good part of what we do, we want to spend and get the best product to get the best result. And so this is a really good, it's a good fusible.
Okay. So also, Warwick carries the Trico and the Weft interfacing, so you may want to compare their prices when you all are out shopping for your interfacings.
Okay. See, I wish they had changed their name. It used to be called the Atlanta Thread Company.
I remember when it was here. It used to be downtown Atlanta. Then it moved to a little suburb in Stockbridge.
Okay.
And then I guess Warwick bought it out and it went away altogether. Yeah. But you used to be able to go in and shop and pick out the items that you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Life changes. Things change.
It does.
Okay. It does. So, other questions?
Now I'm struggling on what I'm going to use for a lining on this.
China silk would work.
Just a plain one. Don't get fancy because the outside is already.
You can get fancy if you want to. See, I'm the guy who I would like something fancy on the outside and something fancy on the inside.
Yeah.
So, just kind of solid color linings. I mean, you saw what I'm using on this. It was like, well, a solid color would be easier, but it was the same amount of money, and I thought it was pretty, so that's what I used. So,
yeah.
One time I remember at another sit and sew, Kenneth, I was working on that copper jacket and I wanted to do an organza skirt with like multiple layers of organza. And I was like, maybe we could do eggplant and a green and a rust orange or something like that. And I looked at you and I said, do you think that's too much? And the evening was like, you are asking the wrong guy.
Yeah. Those three colors because see, those three, I have a fondness for, like, there's one particular, it's, if you know color theory, I like split complementary combinations.
Yeah.
And so one of my favorites is like an aubergine, kind of an olive drab, a coppery orange, and a bronzy, kind of a warm bronze color. Love those together. And so, when you're asking, like, is it too much? Like, for me, it's like, no. Because I'm that guy. Well, actually, I don't know if you saw it on my Instagram, but I'm going to show you all because I love it so much. See that fancy clock back there?
Mm-hmm.
That I found recently at the flea market, and I didn't know whether it worked or not, but I was able to handle them down to $40, and I thought, for $40, if it's just pretty, great. And I got it back here, and I was able to get it running again. So now it runs. But that's kind of my thing, is more is more. I went through a minimalist period right out of college, and I got over that very quickly.
Well, I have a carved, I think it's American Renaissance. The guy sold it to me, said it was an antique from Italy, but I don't believe it. I think but it has the dolphin carved on the back, the green man, face on the, and that kind of stuff. And so it's all over, over the top.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because in this age of minimalism, in which everybody wants to wear black, everybody wants things simple, that's the thing that always gets the compliments. That's the chair that everybody says, "Ooh, I like that."
Yeah.
You may not want to own it because it is so busy.
Well,
but I think at heart, people really like color. They like motion. They like interesting stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's all good. Yeah. Okay. So, other questions before we finish for the day? Okay, I guess our work is done. So, as usual, I will download everything, and you'll get an email later today with all the links for next week and so forth. So, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too. You too.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye.